bring in Ben Shapiro, editor-in-chief of DailyWire.com, syndicated columnist, host of the Ben Shapiro Show. It's a great podcast. Ben, in addition to this thing passing last night, first in the Senate and then in the House in the 5 o'clock hour today, Bette Midler tweeted out after Rand Paul had his little filibuster, said, "Where's Rand Paul's neighbor when you need him?" What do you think of that?
What a class act. I mean, first of all, has Bette Midler been relevant since, like, Beaches in 1988 when I was 4? I'm not sure why she's still around and talking about things and why we care. I guess she was in Hello, Dolly or something. But Rand Paul, just on the substance, is exactly correct. I mean, the fact is that Republicans spent years railing against Obama deficits and Democratic deficits, and now they have power again, and they just spent an enormous sum of money. And I understand they wanted to remove sequestration on the military, but they touted that same sequestration as a big win in 2011. I was there. I remember it. So do you. And so the idea that we have to blow out the budget with a Republican majority in both houses just demonstrates once again that in the end, the American people are really inconsistent about spending. On the one hand, they say they want cuts to spending. On the other hand, the minute anyone proposes a specific cut to spending, the American people start to get very upset about it, and both parties tend to buckle to that rather than educating the public. What
are the implications of this deal then, Ben? Because a lot of people did want that military spending that has been hit by sequestration, but when it comes to debt and deficits, what is this going to mean?
I mean, it's just going to mean a continuation of deficits out till the end of time. We're going to be looking at $30 trillion debts in the near future. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that nobody wants to talk about the real drivers of the debt, and that's not military spending at all. The real driver of the debt is Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. That represents about 60% of the American federal budget. The American military budget is somewhere between 18 and 20%. So the idea that if we raise the military spending, that this is somehow the great driver of the deficit is not true. I just don't understand why Republicans can't make that case. Let's have our military spending, and let's talk about restructuring some of the real issues in the economy. Social Security's been in the red since 2010. I'm not going to see any of the money I'm putting into Social Security.
And we also want to ask you. We want to ask you about these text messages between those lovers at the FBI. Apparently, they don't like the pro-life march because it ties up traffic and for other reasons. This was some of the text exchange back in January of 2016. Strzok says, blanking marchers, making traffic problems. She writes back, I truly hate these people. No support for the woman who actually has to spend the rest of her life rearing this child, but we care about life. And then she says, a-holes.
Well, I mean, they're a classy couple. I mean, if you couldn't tell from their earlier text messages, they really ought to be on the cover of GQ. Just these are the leading figures in American public life. The only question that really matters in the end for Page and Strzok, the only reason we even care about them, is to what extent their political biases ended up making a difference in terms of their bias in the investigation into Hillary Clinton and the investigation into supposed Trump-Russia collusion, of which there's no evidence to this point. We'll have to see what the rest of the investigation shows. This is why we have a House Intelligence Committee. This is why we have a House Oversight Committee. But it obviously isn't good when you have FBI agents who have this sort of obvious political bias texting with one another about how much they hate particular segments of the American population.
You got to figure, though, Ben, that it's a good thing that this Michael Horowitz, who's the Inspector General over at the Department of Justice, that he's also looking into things because he's the reason they're not on Mueller's team anymore. He's also apparently the reason that Andrew McCabe, who is like the #2 guy at the FBI, he's out because of, sounds like, animus against the president.
I mean, the level of bureaucratic incompetence and corruption, the level of political bias inside of our intelligence agencies, there's a reason that the American people don't trust these agencies, and it's not just because President Trump has been railing against them. It's because these agencies acted in non-trustworthy ways during the last election cycle with regard to Hillary Clinton, and the American people are seeing that with each and every breaking story. So it's a good thing that there are some folks who are attempting to ferret this stuff out, but there is going to have to be a cleansing process that takes place, whether it's by President Trump or whether it's by members of the DOJ and FBI themselves. Something has to be done to restore the trust of the American people here.
Ben, so the budget deal was struck, meant to sort of clear the decks for a deal on the president's wall and border security in exchange potentially for a pathway to citizenship for so-called Dreamers, DACA recipients. Well, a couple of Dreamers have come out publicly and said that if they're not allowed to stay legally after the March 5th deadline, they're going to basically self-deport and leave the U.S. if a deal isn't reached. What do you make of that?
So do they want to stay or go?
Well, I mean, I'm sort of confused by the strategy here. I guess the idea is that if so I guess that they're trying to blackmail people who want to deport them with the threat that they will self-deport, which doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. But I guess the real answer is they're trying to blackmail Democrats. They're trying to suggest to Democrats that Democrats don't care enough about DACA recipients. So watching the internecine warfare between potential DACA recipients and dreamers and the Democratic Party that claims to speak for them is sort of amusing.
All right. It's always a pleasure. Ben Shapiro joining us live today. Check out his podcast by the same name. Sir, thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben.